You ready? Oh, wow.
There's a sense of urgency that we all must do something.
We shouldn't feel defeated.
We can do it. Perpetual planet means protecting nature as if our lives depend on it.
We have to keep hope alive.
How can we use our skills to solve these global problems?
I love for my research to have an impact in the life of people.
It takes a collective effort from all of us to inspire, to educate.
Putting all the knowledge together.
Más gente involucrada, más gente.
We are not going to stop until we get the job done.
It was just the beginning. Fantastic.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our continuation of World Oceans Week. We'll probably have some more people trickling in, but we thought you'd probably rather get going than wait. So here we go. My name is Ted Janulis, and I'm your host tonight, but we have a fantastic night planned. But before we get to that, just a couple of things. First, just on Rolex, we mention it every single time, but World Oceans Week just would not have happened without Rolex. It was the first UN Ocean Conference in New York City in 2017. We thought we have a cool building over here, and when people are done with the UN, they can come over and visit. And Rolex backed us and stayed with us ever since. Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, I think Erica is in the audience, is a year-on-year supporter, as is the Phil Stevenson Foundation and many others. And we're always grateful for the volunteers, our committee, our co-chairs, all the folks who make this possible, and of course, the incredible staff. So just a brief update before we turn things over to the incredible David Gruber. Just by way of the week, we started Sunday night with a small reception at the UN, and our official club laureate and trustee, who I think I saw, is Leonard here? Leonard Levy? Right here. This man, if you ever hear he's going to be reading one of his poems, you have got to go. He did an ode to Sylvia Earle, which was just spectacular. So I would expect to see him early and often, we hope, in future programming. Last night, which is Monday night, right? Yeah, Monday night. It's going fast. Yes, we celebrated with Dr. Sylvia Earle. It is technically, it's her 90th birthday this year, but also from her perspective, she really wants to mark the anniversary of Mission Blue at 15 years. And this is the group shot we took outside. Yeah. Luis Muga, I think you blinked. Yeah. So for those of you, I don't have the picture, but there was basically, is Mark Brian Brown here? No. So Mark is a professional photographer. He does like corporate annual reports and stuff like that. And so he had this idea a while back. And so for the last 4 days, the club staff has been blocking the spaces, putting up orange cones. Someone took the orange cones away. We put more in, hoping you don't all get arrested, because if there were 2 cars right there, you absolutely could not do this. So amazing amount of work. And then for him to accordion everybody, and this is the making of you're getting here. The making of was incredible with him getting everybody bunched in. And you can see Sylvia in the middle with David Shaw with the blue champagne toast. And that, yes, there actually is a blue champagne without food coloring in it, which we had. And then people kept their hope as the ocean glasses. So we felt that was a great recognition for Sylvia. We did a lot with Hope Spots. We had new Hope Spots. We had returning Hope Spots. We had Hope Spot Workshop. We had Rolex flag return, Rolex watch return, and also flag returns from multiple expeditions. And so now tonight, as we move on, we have just a really special night. And I feel privileged to know all 3 of the presenters, but I'm going to let David Gruber do the introductions for his panel, which he's moderating. And if you haven't met David yet, you are in for an incredible treat. He is what, I guess the word that pops to my mind is a polymath, meaning that somehow he manages to be an expert on an incredible amount of things. He discovered the biofluorescent, it's fluorescent, right? Yeah, as opposed to bioluminescent. The biofluorescent sea turtle, he built cameras that see the way animals see. So he's got a shark cam, and is there a turtle cam? There's a turtle cam. You get the idea. And then he's got squishy fingers, which are really soft, sponge-like things. So you can go down and gently pick things up. Anything but nodules, but you can pick them up. It's really easy to do. And most recently, and you'll hear about this, so I'll just mention it briefly, but he was a TED Audacious Prize winner. And the name of the project is Project SETI, which you'll hear about, which is talking to whales. And what I like to say is, this is not like, here's a ball, here's a stick. This is like really, really communicating with whales using an incredible team of worldwide scientists and engineers. And you'll hear more about it, so I don't want to take that away, but I think that's an important piece. Oh, sorry. And then I also want, before you give it to David, this is the Blue Gen program, which you've heard a lot about. They're actually downstairs in the Apollo room now watching remotely, but they did one of their day trips today to the WCS aquarium. And they got a behind-the-scenes tour, and thanks to a board member, Natalie Cash, who set this whole thing up. This was not your average tour. They were the shark expert. They went all behind the scenes. They all came back energized today. We talked to them. They were just very excited about it. And to cap things off, Martha Shaw, who I think is here. Are you here, Martha? Yep. Just impulsively bought them all Explorers Club caps. So, yeah. So now if you miss the blue lanyards that we say used to find them, you can definitely get them by the caps. So, and I think they're having a great time, and they're really energizing the place, which is one of the reasons we really enjoy that program. So back to tonight. I was a little bit about the week. By the way, tomorrow, I just mentioned, in case you don't have plans yet, we have a sort of two-part thing that's based on the UN theme of wonder. And each year, the UN Ocean Conference or UN Ocean Day pick a theme, and this year it's wonder. And so we have Oceanic Global's winning films. They're all shorts from, I think, 30 seconds to 7 minutes, and then a panel talking about them. And then we also have the finalists from the same theme, wonder, but photography. And that's a competition that the UN's been running for years now, and that will have a panel. So a really great evening. And then Thursday, we have our deep sea exploration, mapping the seafloor, that Alex Wallace has done a great job curating. Victor Vescovo from Five Deeps and so much more. We have Craig McLean and Erica, who's with us, we just mentioned, is going to be moderating that panel. So a lot's still to come, but we're right in the heart of it now. So without any further ado, I already told you a little bit about David. David, it's okay, I'll let you talk about our panelists and moderate, but we're really looking forward to this. These are three absolutely brilliant people doing insanely cool things. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ted, and it's a pleasure to be here in this room in the Explorers Club. This is like one of the most storied rooms around, you know, where we have elements of some of the greatest human feats, and so it's really an honor to be here today to kind of tee this up. This is not about me today. I'm really want to focus this on Keitany Katija and Richard Vivers. And the theme, though, I just want to bring home the theme. The theme here, it's Ocean Week, which is a beautiful thing because the ocean is 71% of the planet, and we all have ocean in us. We came from the ocean. But the theme of even thinking of how this club has been around since 1904, and the time and thinking of the different explorers and the different feats of, we have a flag that went to the moon. We're going to hear from Victor going to the deepest parts of the ocean. This is really about like human imagination and what is possible. And this being able to introduce the big ideas is such an important thing because this exemplifies human imagination. This is what makes us different than the millions of other species out there, is this ability to dream big. Can I go to the moon, actually have a little lunar module, like get out and walk around and then get back in it and come back home? And we've seen that in the 60s, and we saw the potential of a human imagination. And I'm wearing this little Apollo pin here, which is from my dad, who was on the Apollo team. And it's probably because, you never want to do what your parents do, so you take a different route. So I'm like, yeah, space, I'm gonna go with the ocean instead and be a biologist. But tonight is really about connectivity, and we're in for such a treat tonight because we're gonna be connecting the space and ocean and human imagination, and we could travel through galaxies in our mind. But in one sense, the ocean community has felt like, oh, the ocean community, we're gonna hang like over here, and we're gonna have our own week, and then the space community is gonna have their week there. But this is kind of like we're starting to see this bridge here, and we're gonna see the bridge here really strong tonight through our two big idea folks. So I just wanna kind of start out with Keqani. We know each other and we work together, and I'll talk a little bit about how we've worked together, but beyond our work together is vast. And just to give some background, a BS in aeronautics and astronautics from the University of Washington, and then went on to Caltech, where she did a master's in aeronautics again, and then also a PhD in bioengineering. There's a secret piece that I've learned is kind of also was a professional ice skater, which is like, listen, we all got to have you can't just work all the time, that makes us quite dull. So I love it when, and it kind of shows the precision, that landing that how many axles that you could spin around to get it on the edge there. But you really kind of, especially coming from Caltech and doing the aeronautics, exemplified bringing this together. We work together on a crazy project, which is everything. Like, I think that's what exemplifies you, is that you go so far outside what people think is possible, and then suddenly it's possible. Same thing as like, I don't know, I don't think you guys are gonna be able to go to the moon, and then, okay, you can do it. So now we work on a project where we're working on creating digital holotypes in the deep sea, using technology, being able to identify new species, using some of the amazing technology that Keqani develops to scan them and to look inside of them. And then we could actually, we could encase them, we could swab them, we could do DNA, RNA, basically create this vast amount of information from a single animal in just a short encounter. And then the dream is to open it up and let it go. So this is really in deep contrast to deep sea mining, where they're just kind of mowing around and grabbing things. So this work and the work that you're doing with Fathom Morse is truly inspirational, truly groundbreaking, and it's an honor to introduce you here today. Take it away.
That was very sweet. And I'm very excited to be here. This is actually my first time at the Explorers Club. And so I don't know why it's taken me so long to visit, but I've really enjoyed my time here. I got to go to dinner last night with Sylvia and the rest of her team. So anyways, I feel very grateful and fortunate to be here. And today I'm gonna talk about one project, but also how this one project is nested in with a lot of other ideas, big ideas, I guess, that's coming out of our group. I need to, though, thank the individuals and organizations that have supported specifically this project. First and foremost, the National Science Foundation. They're getting hammered right now, and I really want to highlight the fact that, without their support, we would not have the Fathomverse. Schmidt Marine Technology Partners and Erica, they've come through and helped us really build out some of the features that we recently launched, which I'll talk about. And then, of course, my institution, MBARI, who continues to support me, and members of our group. And then down below, we've also been supported by a number of different organizations. I wanted to highlight Dalio Philanthropies, whom we recently started supporting the FathomNet program, of which Fathomverse is a part of. And so with that, because this is my first time here, I thought it would be kind of fun to introduce myself a little bit. And one of the fun things I like to do is start with, the usual 10-year-old photo, right? And this is a photo of myself at my 10-year-old birthday party. And I like, it's funny because I know I'm a nerd. I've been a nerd. And I've been a nerd for a really, really long time, and this is, as far as I know, the first photographic evidence of this. And I'm really easy to spot. I'm not the person who's holding the Barbie. I am the person there that is very excited about a spirograph. And I think a lot of you know what that is. It makes these really beautiful geometric shapes if you're any good with plastic gears and drawing implements. But this was, a while ago. I'm not going to age myself. But what I realized too back then, I used to watch a lot of Star Trek reruns with my dad, not Star Trek's Next Generation, like the original Star Trek. And the reason why I was so fascinated with that show was because of the mission that the crew, the original Star Trek crew, actually had. It wasn't about, avoiding Klingons. It was about actually going to these far off places and interacting with and learning from new life that they would come across, right? And it wasn't just learning about them, it was also bringing that information home. And so for me, that was, I think, the most noble activity you could possibly be involved in. And that's why I wound up going into aerospace engineering, because I thought, well, the closest group or individuals that might be doing that kind of work would be astronauts, and maybe through aerospace engineering, I'd be able to do that kind of work. And so, this is just a photo from my time on the Vomit Comet. The name is really great. And really, this is my opportunity, first time where I was in the field, right? The fact that you're perhaps running an experiment and you are, just having to roll with whatever nature or the natural world comes at you and shares with you, right? And so normally engineers tend to be in sub-basements somewhere, right? In a building without any windows. This was my first opportunity to see how we could apply engineering outside of the sub-basements of various research facilities. And so what's fascinating, so this was during undergrad and then right before I started my PhD at Caltech. And it was in this period of time where, I did some work at NASA and then wound up somehow getting involved with jellyfish propulsion. And what happened was then in graduate school, I love to use this as a quick descriptor, is instead of looking for life in outer planets or outer space, I started looking for life or at life much closer to home. And so while this isn't a star field, this is actually what the ocean looks like at 300 or 400 meters deep in the Monterey Bay Canyon. And so while we haven't yet found life, right, in our outer planets or outside of this planet, the ocean is teeming with life that we know just almost nothing about. And so one of the problems that I'm really focused on, I think it's a big challenge of our community, is not only, understanding life in the ocean, but also reporting where it's at and how it's changing over time. And one of the ways I like to at least describe that in an image is this image. It's actually data that's pulled from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. And this database, it's a global database, and what it does is it houses information about where in the world have we seen biology. And so another way to describe this is an occurrence data set. So, through all of history, the information that's contained in GBIF tells you where on the globe have we seen an animal for all time. And whenever I see plots like this, and I go to a lot of these biodiversity conferences, they tend to focus on what's happening in the terrestrial space, right? Like you can see that there's a gap in northern Africa. You could see that there's a gap in the obviously the Antarctic and the Arctic. But I'm, as one of the few ocean people at these biodiversity conferences, I'm the one in the back yelling, what about the ocean, right? We have massive knowledge gaps of life that lives and occurs in the ocean, as you can see here. And more recently, I'm a co-author on a paper that's currently in review. Our lead author is Will Ostrich. And he also looked at data, so that was the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And I want to say that that data set, as well as this one, the Ocean Biodiversity Information Service or System, it's those two data sets that are being used to inform how policymakers might be utilizing either terrestrial spaces or ocean spaces. And what Will has done with this paper is he's extracted all of the data that, that has been, occurrence data of animals within the ocean. And on the top, that shows you where we might have surface observations. So that's anywhere from the top down to 200 meters. And then he looked at the records that have depths greater than 200 meters. Another way to look at this is on this plot where you could see, we have a lot of information in these data sets or databases that's between, 0 and 200 meters. But very, very quickly, we have no information. Right? The average depth of the ocean is 4,000 meters, and you can see we have very little information there. And so this is just occurrence data, right? A snapshot in time at a place. And when we're talking about things, I think, that are really important to the ocean, particularly as we, have activities in the ocean. I think, David, you mentioned deep sea mining, or Summit Ted, I think you mentioned that. This is the state of our capability of doing repeat observations of ocean life. So this is a paper that was written a few years ago. They looked at both OBIS and GBIF data sets, and they basically plotted where in the world do we have repeat observations of life within the ocean. And what they found, I also wanted to say that they actually constrained their search to just like the upper 5 or 15 meters of the ocean. They also excluded remote sensing data. And what they found was that about 7% of the ocean surface area is covered by long-term biological observations. And by long-term, we're talking at least 5 years. So keep in mind, David, you also mentioned that the ocean is about 71%. That's the surface area of the ocean. The ocean represents about 99% of the habitable living space by volume in the ocean. So this scale, or what we've been able to do so far, pales in comparison to where we really need to be if we want to be able to say something about how our activities might be impacting life that lives there. And so it's problems like these, big problems like these, that really have inspired me, at least, to build my lab at MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And I want to tell you a little bit about it because I don't know if a lot of people have heard about MBARI. I think people have heard about Monterey Bay Aquarium a lot. MBARI isn't the same institution. In fact, the Monterey Bay Aquarium is found right in Monterey, and where MBARI is located is in a little fishing town called Moss Landing. And when you look at the bathymetry of the Monterey Bay Canyon there, you could see why. We're right at the entrance of a very deep submarine canyon that allows us to get offshore in a very short period of time, deep into deep waters, so that we could test technologies, we could, run different types of experiments, and we could do this all in a really short period of time. And so MBARI's mission is to really focus on creation of methods and techniques and approaches so that we can help to understand how the ocean functions as well as the ocean life. And then my group, the Bioinspiration Lab, is really focused on how do we create technologies or approaches that help us to increase our understanding of deep ocean life. And the ways in which we do this, it's somewhat broad, and I'd like to use this as just a quick example of some of the ways we've been able to do that so far, and then also highlight some of the ways that I think we're moving in towards the future. But the first thing that we've really focused on is creating state-of-the-art instrumentation. David mentioned some of the instrumentation that we've been using as part of our collaborations. DPIV is a laser-based illumination system that allows us to do three-dimensional reconstructions of animals in situ. IRIS is a relatively new imaging system that allows us to do volumetric measurements or really finely detailed spatial measurements with a single frame of a camera. We did just learn that our paper is now conditionally accepted at Nature that describes IRIS, so stay tuned for some cool octopus locomotion videos that will be coming at you really quick. And then another imaging system that we've deployed and developed is called Chiton. It's a 7-camera payload that's integrated onto our autonomous underwater vehicles so that we can get a lot of information, contextual information around the animals that we observe in the deep sea. The other thing that we do is we not only utilize innovative observation platforms, we also develop them as well. And so we've been working on a number of ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, obviously autonomous underwater vehicles, and then also co-developed the Musobot, which is a vehicle with Woods Hole and a couple of other institutions focused on how do we observe life in the ocean's midwaters. And then last but not least, access to novel study systems is incredibly important, right? I showed you our knowledge gaps. We also know that there's anywhere from 30 to 60% of life is unknown or undescribed by science. And so one of the big challenges is how do we give access or how do we share access to the life that lives in these difficult to access places? And this goes beyond just research vessels or instrumentation or vehicles, right? We're really focused on data. How do we get information from the data that we collect so that we can fill these global data sets and inform what we know about ocean biodiversity? And so it's these two things that I'm going to talk about for the rest of my talk this evening, but really everything that our group is focused on is around filling those knowledge gaps that you saw, right, in those maps that I shared earlier. So back to filling these gaps. I think there's a lot of members in our community that have done fantastic work, not only deploying imaging systems or, there's also environmental DNA, but I'm going to focus on imaging for this talk. All over the world, they could use either really expensive remotely operated vehicles or these autonomous underwater vehicles. More recently, we're seeing more drop cameras that are, lower cost or more accessible systems. But one of the challenges is when we do these kinds of deployments, what happens to that data? A lot of people have no plans or very few plans on how they can process that information. And what's, I think, really amazing about visual data is not only the value of the information that you can get from it if you extract that information, it's also a mechanism for engagement, right? The idea that we can share really quickly what life looks like underwater. And so this is just an example of one of our remotely operated vehicles in Monterey Bay collecting visual data during a survey. And at MBARI, we're really fortunate that we have a group of visual taxonomists. They are professionals who watch this kind of footage and then annotate everything in it. So the different animals that you see, the different down to species level in some cases, they'll note the substrate that these animals might be on. And so you can quickly, draw relationships between who's there, how many is there, what substrate do they associate with, etc. But that is a time-consuming process. Never mind, it requires a ton of expertise in order to do this. It could take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours of time to annotate footage that might be about an hour long, right? So this isn't something that's easily transferable. And so how do we do this broadly as a community, especially when we know people are going to be exponentially increasing their deployments of visual or imaging systems to collect this kind of data? And so one of the things that we've really, really focused on is how do we do this? And I would say, traditionally, when people think about visual data, it will go into this processing loop. I'm drawing it here as a black box because oftentimes it isn't discussed at all. But the goal, right, is to get annotated data out. It's because those annotations are what eventually wind up in the GBIFs or the OBISs in the world, right? Informs biodiversity monitoring. And more recently, groups have been using things like artificial intelligence to try and be able to process all of this information. But depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of people out there who will like to tell you, I can train a model, it will identify everything in your visual data, and you'll not have to do anything else. And that isn't true. I work with a lot of experts in AI, and really the crux of this problem is human verification. So like, how do you train models so that they can do a really good job in looking at ocean life, but also how do you make sure that those models are functioning well enough so that you can trust the data that's coming out? And so that human verification part is our massive bottleneck that we need to address. And so this is something that we focused on. The National Science Foundation really came through and provided funding for us to focus on how might we fill this human verification problem, given there's not a lot of experts in the world that have the time to do this kind of work, versus there's lots of enthusiasts in the world that want to contribute, want to participate, but don't know how they can do that. And so what we've focused a lot on is creation of these, what we call human AI interfaces. How do we get humans collaborating really effectively and efficiently with artificial intelligence so that we can, speed up and analyze all of this data that's coming in? And so I wanted to start with the experts. And the experts are really important. And we're talking experts in marine taxonomy. We're talking about experts in computer science, right? The people who actually know how these systems work and are aware of these new approaches and algorithms that could address some of our challenges. And so what we built was the FathomNet database. And I put QR codes up here so you all can check them out on your own time. And what the FathomNet database represents is basically a collection of imagery that's been expertly labeled that represents all ocean life. At least that's the goal. And the idea here is we can create a central repository that not only helps inform marine taxonomists or people training to be taxonomists, but also attract computer scientists, the people, the experts in AI, to work on ocean-related problems, because they largely go where the data is. And so this is a project that we've launched, now like 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been really interesting to see different data contributions from different research groups and institutions around the world as we slowly populate this information to represent all ocean life. The second thing that we launched, and this is just last fall, is called the FathomNet Portal, and what this does is it allows people who have visual data and give them access to these machine learning pipelines so that they can process their information, get annotations out, and then push those annotations to these global biodiversity data sets. And then last but certainly not least, this is the project or the program that I think has I would say, not overwhelmed, but this is like my passion project that I'm really, really excited about, is Fathomverse. And Fathomverse is meant and built especially for enthusiasts. And I wanted to highlight that, my background's in engineering, right? I don't know very much about engagement. And this is where going to the source, right? Going to the experts really helped us, because we co-created Fathomverse with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, who knows all about public engagement and how to get people really excited about the ocean. And we also contracted with a game design studio in the Netherlands called Anrange Serious Games. And together we've been able to create a gaming experience where anyone, anywhere in the world with a device, a mobile device, can contribute directly to ocean science. But before I go into the specifics of Fathomverse, I wanted to kind of take a step back and explain kind of the basis, or at least maybe part of the inspiration and the approach that we're trying to take with Fathomverse. And there was this article that was written by Jyotika Virmani. I think a lot of you know her name. I think she's been to the Explorers Club multiple times. At the time she wrote this, she was a part of the X Prize Foundation. Now I think we know her better as the director of the Schmidt Ocean Institute. And I like to highlight this article because, she had a very similar, I would guess, professional experience starting in space and then now oceans, as well as myself, right, starting in space and now doing ocean stuff. And I recommend reading the article, but I tried to do my best to highlight some of the, the outcomes from the article. And what she did was she contrasted the space community and how we do public engagement versus the ocean community and how it's done. And what she focused on was the messaging tone, and as well as narrative focuses. So, in space, messaging tone tends to be really positive. Narrative focuses tends to be really ideas-based, like climate change, which the general public, unfortunately, has struggled with for a really long time for a number of different reasons. She also highlighted the fact that the messaging content matched the community structure that we see within the ocean space. So the fact is there's hundreds, if not thousands, of NGOs, academic groups, government organizations, right, education institutions that all talk about the ocean. They all have their own pet project or pet approach. And what happens is their messaging tends to be really politicized, where every organization or group is trying to push forward their own agenda. And contrast that with the space community, right? Now, while that might be a little bit different now, I would say back when she wrote this, it was NASA for the United States, right? It was very clear what was at least interesting to the space community for a member of the general public who wasn't immersed in it. And then last but certainly not least was narrative outcomes. And I don't fault our ocean community for doing this, right? There are some pretty dire situations going on in the ocean. And what we wanted to do differently with Fathomverse was basically adopt the approaches that we know has worked really, really well in space and apply it to an ocean-related project. And so what we've done is we've really focused on a positive messaging tone. We're really mission-based, and I'll explain what that means a little bit. We also celebrate collective human achievement, the fact that we're all working together to accomplish something pretty incredible. And then what we're trying to do is provide a unified and cross-promotional voice that's also really forward-looking. And by forward-looking, this is around kind of our mission, like what our goals were. And so other things that we designed around was the idea that we could provide an opportunity for everyone to explore the ocean, right? The idea that a game player or a person picking up Fathomverse can have agency and choose what it is that they want to do, all under the guise of contributing to ocean science. The other thing is we try to create an enjoyable experience out of something where I think a lot of us, especially if we're doing this professionally, would struggle with, right? So creating both an audio-visual pleasure in order to make something really enjoyable as well as productive. And we also really leaned into casual play. I think, a lot of groups are focused on, VR or like gaming consoles. What we wanted to do was create an experience that would allow anyone who had a quick break in their day, waiting in line, to contribute meaningfully to ocean science. So it's very casual. It's meant to be done in like 5-minute long, bite-sized pieces. And then the last two things I think is really important. So we did game design workshops, invited lots of people through Monterey Bay Aquarium's networks, and we asked them, what kind of narrative, what kind of story do they want us to perhaps ingest or inject into the game? And what was interesting is I would say 95% of the people that we had involved in these workshops wanted everything to be real. They didn't want a fake narrative. They just want to contribute to ocean science. And so lastly is the inspiring mission. And it's not a small idea, it's a rather big one. We're inviting everyone to join us in discovering all life in the ocean. And we're doing it. Yeah. So this is our little trailer. And we launched the game about a year ago. And so I'll share a couple highlights. But what I want to say too, like this isn't just a game. You just saw the beautiful front end. We are also, engineers. So there's software engineers that are involved in this. There's, of course, engagement specialists, marketing groups. And the whole point is there's been a lot of thought behind how we've built Fathomverse so that it can grow with time. And so what you see there on the left, that's an example of some of the content that we have in the game, where the individual missions that game players participate in is looking for particular animal groups to either detect them or identify them and classify them. As game players play the game, they earn contribution points and they can unlock content. And that's content that's either within the game, that could be awards. We create badges and quests so that people can, be inspired or motivated to do specific things. For instance, Dawn Wright, who's the first Black person to reach the Mariana Trench, she just contributed her data to the Fathomverse, and we made a huge event out of it for this whole week. And then I think we kickstart another event next week for the UN Ocean Week as well. And then finally, the idea here is that we're able to not only grow without requiring an additional game version. There's an entire database that undergirds this system. But as we look to the future, what we've done is we've created multiple, I call them mini games, but they're really different data interactions that would allow us not only to just start with visual data, but also think long-term in terms of maybe we would want to incorporate audio data and have people help us identify ocean life using that modality. And someone's opened up the game, and when you do open up the game, there's incredible videos that explains how it works, and also how are you as a game player contributing to ocean science. And so when we look to the future, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that we've done so far and we learned so far. I mean, the first is I'm just incredibly grateful to the organizations who've provided support, funding support, because to do this and to do this right with a growth mindset requires a lot of resources. I could obviously use a lot more, but the idea here is that with about $1 million US, we've been able to put together what we have now. Don't worry, I'm glad somebody has already downloaded it. And since we launched, I hope so. Since we launched, we have now more than 37,000 players representing 180 different countries who collectively have generated about 20 million annotations, all used for science. I know, I'm really excited about it. And one of the things I do want to highlight, right, is remember that FathomNet database. That's the expert data set that we're using to train artificial intelligence and use it for a number of applications. What the game players have already been able to do in this really short period of time is basically with their votes and their consensus, they've created consensus on about half of the images that can currently be found in the FathomNet data set. So it's I think, this kind of engagement, this broad community outreach has so much power, and we're so early in this process that I'm just excited to see where this takes us. And then, we have 175 denizens of the deep, so these are people all over the world who have reached the highest levels, are very, very engaged on our Discord server and talking about how, helping others along as we try to discover all life in the ocean. And again, so it's not just the Fathomverse team, our team at MBARI, our other collaborators. It's also the institutions and groups that are generating a lot of this data and are contributing that data to us, right? They trust that we are making the right decisions around how those data are used. And I just wanted to highlight, Schmidt Ocean Institute has been fantastic contributors of data. NOAA's Office of Exploration and Research, Ocean Networks Canada has been contributing data to us, and then as well as the National Science Foundation's Ocean Observatories Initiative, Ocean Exploration Trust, so Bob Ballard's organization, and then, of course, my institution. Then more recently, Dawn Wright, as part of Caladan and Esri, gave a data contribution. And then now, I'm still waiting for it to happen, but National Geographic's Pristine Seas program is to start contributing. And so the idea is that over time, we're going to be able to have more data that's representing more life in different areas of the ocean that we have never been able to collect that kind of information and have that in one place that's then pushed right to these global data sets so we can inform decision-making around biodiversity. And so this is kind of the big idea, right, is like how do we get people's input in this really, really challenging problem, given where they are. They're in different places, they have different levels of expertise, and really this idea is over time we're hoping to create a network of contributors that can help us with this human verification process and problem so that we can get annotated data out. And so with that, I want to say it's not just about the data, it's also about what it will allow us to do once we do have that information. And while I've focused and spent so much time in my career on like remote technologies, how do we use these really expensive, massive instruments and vehicles to do exploration, really what we need to do if we want to be filling all of these data gaps is to move more and more towards autonomy. And so one of the things that we've been able to show is that now that we have data in the FathomNet database, we are able to use these models within the control systems of our vehicles so that we can do really, really difficult tasks that would take a very, I would say, a very experienced ROV pilot to do, and now apply this on a number of different systems without requiring a human in the loop. And then this is an example of a vehicle that's looking for a particular animal, in this case, a giant larvation, and then changing its behavior once it detects it or verifies that it is. And you'll hear me, I don't sound very excited, but I actually am. This is like the first demonstration of this being able to happen. And this is thanks to the data that we have in FathomNet to train algorithms and then apply them to our robotic systems. I know, wow. We got it. And so this is the goal, right? Like, we want to be able to deploy an imaging system anywhere in the ocean and be able to identify the life that we see there. And so while this is an example of a model that's trained on data collected in Monterey Bay and deployed on imaging that's been collected in Monterey Bay, really we want to be able to do this, you know, in the Indian Ocean or, you know, places we haven't been before, and be able to do it quickly and rapidly so that we can inform how we're using these spaces before they've changed irreversibly. And so this is the vision, this is the goal, and I'm really excited, and I hope that, you know, FathomNet will help us get there. So with that, thank you all for your time.
Wow, amazing. I mean, these are some big ideas. I love the fact that like half the room has already downloaded this already. So that just, the QR code goes a long way. I mean, amazing talk. I think you really exemplify. I love the, what was the game you were playing? In the game when you were young? Spirograph. Like I love the journey from Spirograph. That nerd, that kid is so important in all this and thinking of the ideas. I think the hardest part about being a scientist is constantly channeling that 10-year-old in us that we all have of like everything was fascinating, and also just thinking to give a shout out to the Explorers Club for the Blue Gen program, you know, because this is really intergenerational issues that we're confronting. This is the work that Kakani's showing is something that will this is passing to the next generation and the next generation. So this is probably, these are a huge, 99% of the habitable place on Earth. So this, someone else is downloading. All right, there goes another user. You're up to what was the super user, like the denizens of the deep? Yeah, I think we've got some contention because you made it competitive, which is good. There's probably some super competitors in here, which you're going for. But now we're moving on to Richard Vevers. You're right, 99%. You're not going to forget that. Thinking about, I mean, you really tapped into so much. I resulted to the part of going for jellyfish. I got interested in jellyfish propulsion, and just how hard it is to actually train AI to another application for other life forms other than humans. So much of this AI is designed, focused for Homo sapien, And to go outward is actually incredibly challenging. So the annotating, I was actually on the end of annotating a lot of this deep sea stuff, and it's horrible, you know, and boring. You're like, I became a marine biologist, so I'm like, you know, looking at blurry frame grabs. But this work just gets it more exciting. Thinking about the diversity of minds and brains that need to come into these big ideas, Richard really exemplifies that, because this is not just for scientists. Like, you know, the ocean's great. There's a lot of science that be done, but we're humans. We're weird, complicated, crazy animals. Like, I don't even know what we are, you know, and we operate on, you know, there's a great E.O. Wilson quote that we have primal emotions and medieval institutions and God sent technology, and combined it's a really, you know, a really dangerous mix. And I think sometimes when we get so involved in the science, but we need to consider the psychology. And Richard comes to the ocean from many years working in London ad agencies. And I was introduced to Richard many years ago, actually, also through Jane Kachmer. And I remember the first time he met him, he was like, oh, I'm running an ad agency for the ocean, you know? And I was like, all right, tell me more. You know, what do you mean you're an ad agency for the ocean, you know? Like, you know, and I'm Donald Duck. You know, and it was just, you know, and now, in the time since that, I saw Richard as a lead character in the amazing Jeff Orleski movie Chasing Coral, which is a lead character. Moved into the ocean probably from his love for underwater photography, and also this kind of adventurous mind of moving from designing the first type of Google Street View, but designing the underwater cameras that made to bring that underwater. And now is kind of playing on the ocean space theme, is running Room 71 at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is part of the communications office there. And I think bringing the genius of connecting psychology and bringing people on this journey. And the play on Room 71, which is 71% of the area of the Earth is covered in ocean, but it's a play off of Area 51, which for all the kind of alien, you know, seekers among us, including Connie, I was kind of thinking you're sort of like, you know, you're like the, you know, the Amy Adams of Arrival, or the, you know, the Jodie Foster at Contact. Like, you are searching for alien life. It's just, you know, right here, the interterrestrial. And so again, these themes of Area 51, which leading to Room 71, and Richard's now going to share some of his big ideas moving ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be back here. I actually love this night, the Big Ideas Night in Oceans Week. Ted invited me previously, and I did a sort of Big Ideas Night, and it was really around sort of corals, and this was a few years ago. And it was really about how do we engage people with corals in sort of really disruptive ways to really bolster support for action. And that was, that whole work was very successful about unlocking funding. So using sort of marketing techniques to get people engaged with the subject matter, and then coming up with solutions which are very, very creative to unlock the funding. And it resulted in about $200 million worth of funding towards coral reef conservation that's targeted. But it was that sort of presentation that I did here that really changed my direction. And it was because someone's sitting just about where you are, sir. Sam Harp from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And sort of he listened to the presentation. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is legendary. They've been really pioneering ocean exploration since 1930. They built the first ever ocean science ship, called it Atlantis, and it was so pioneering that NASA named a space shuttle after it. That's the kind of organization that we're talking about here. And so we got sort of into conversation. Could we sort of do what we were doing for coral reefs, but maybe for broader oceans? And over time, I sort of mulled that over. And then finally ended up going up to visit Sam at Woods Hole. And then started chatting to the scientists and sort of really trying to sort of find out about sort of what didn't I know about the ocean. Now, at this stage, I was still had a bit of the cocky ab man approach, and believed I knew quite a lot about the ocean. You know, I'd been traveling to, I think, 34 countries diving, taking Google Street View underwater, thousands of dives, and I thought I had a pretty good picture of the ocean. I'd been running an ocean charity for 15 years, sort of ocean conservation. But then I met the scientists at Woods Hole, and I realized I knew nothing. But this is a subject I was fascinated in, and I just couldn't understand why I didn't know more. And they told me about things like, oh, did you know about the great layer of life in the ocean, where 70% of the animals on the planet live, or roughly that number? And I just could not believe I didn't know about this great layer of life in the ocean. And it's in the sort of twilight zone. And so then you go on to sort of meet other scientists. And I actually got really interested in talking to the scientists focusing on microbial life. And I'd never really thought much about microbial life. Yes, you hear, oh, there's a lot in a litre of water. Turns out there's about 10 billion life forms in a litre of water. But then they started talking about kind of the mass of this. It's a lot of life here. So how much life? And they say, well, think of a humpback whale. And about 1.5 billion humpback whales. And this life turns over about every 48 hours. Now imagine the evolution and life forms that goes on when you've got that amount of biomass turning over that quickly. And it's the largest part of the carbon cycle. And it's the part that we know the least about. But it's phenomenal what we could learn from this if we really studied it. And that wasn't all. I mean, there were just so many examples. One of my favourites was someone studying ctenophores, so comb jellies. And it's one of those things, you go diving and you see them and you don't take any notice. But not actually sort of jellyfish. They're sort of kind of the most alien creatures on the planet, pretty much, unrelated to any other creature. And they've got this great skill of kind of catching their prey with their sticky tentacles and then anaesthetizing it. And when the prey wakes up, they wake up in the stomach. Perfectly healthy, but in a rather bad place. But this is novel chemistry. These are aliens with novel chemistry, novel physiology, and yet we haven't studied the chemistry because there hasn't been kind of the enthusiasm for looking at these as alien creatures which could hugely benefit humanity. Think of all the people suffering from pain who could do with better pain relief. And so it's mind-blowing when you think that if this was found on Mars, there would be a blank check to investigate and learn from these animals. But we don't think of deep-sea animals as aliens. So my big idea was, well, okay, let's take on the big one. It was that question that was asked to Sylvia. So how do we engage people with the ocean? We've really struggled with this for the last sort of 20 years. And so it was really sort of, how can we change how they think about the ocean so they actually believe that it's important and it has potential? You know, transform the image of ocean science and reimagine how we communicate about the ocean. And so the first order of business was to come up with a name. That's where you've got to start. And I just love the idea of it being a little bit kind of Area 51, playing on the kind of this, every ocean video you ever hear is, the ocean is 71% of the planet. But that's the gateway to this kind of magical, much larger world that is truly extraordinary, full of extraordinary life. And we actually sort of, I was inspired by the Explorers Club, so we made it kind of like a mini Ocean Explorers Club up at Woods Hole. And the first thing we thought, what we really need to do is this what you do in advertising, really try to dig deep to understand the problem. So understanding the problem was, why do we look at the ocean and we don't see its reality, its importance and potential? And we actually sort of worked on a project with Yale School of Management. These are brilliant sort of scientists who really understand human behavior, especially how it is in terms of responses to sort of advertising, these kind of things. And we sort of worked out that it's absolutely normal, completely normal to undervalue and misunderstand the ocean. Almost everyone does. And I put myself in that category, even running an ocean conservation organization. It's also completely normal to think you know more about the ocean than you actually do. And this is something called, they actually got a name for it at Yale. It's called the illusion of explanatory depth. You think you're an expert, then someone asks you a question and you're like, no idea. And these two combine and sort of compound each other to get to a point where it's completely normal to think the ocean is important. We hear it all the time, but to not actually believe it. And that is really important, sort of understanding that this is a belief system. It's not about the head. People are okay in sort of what they think, but it's what they believe that's the problem. And so what happens when you believe something's not that important is you ignore it or you quickly forget it. So ocean information isn't that important. You can learn something and then forget it the following day because it's not that important. Obviously, this is a little bit more complicated and deeper. A lot of it is around sort of reactions of people around you and how you react. But that really sort of sums it up. It is this belief system. And the thinking is really that we are just visual species. We judge things subconsciously all the time, and the visuals of the ocean, even if you go underwater, you're looking at this world that is quite similar to our world, except we can't live there very easily. So it's this sort of just view of our world, and it is very similar. You look and it's kind of blue. It works in a very similar way. It's kind of photosynthesis. It's things that we can relate to. But then there's this other part of the ocean when you get deeper and you look at it, and it still looks quite a lot like our world, just not much life in it. And it kind of almost looks like your sort of bare garden at night under a torch. And so it's very difficult to communicate what this environment, an extraordinary environment, actually is. It's really what cannot be seen that's most important, not what can be seen. You can't see the pressure, you can't see the temperature, you can't see the chemistry, you can't see the microbial life, you can't see the currents. That's what's critically important, but you look at this image and it's not an extraordinary environment to you. And that's all sort of subconscious. So we need to overcome kind of these sort of visual biases that we have. And so sort of with this understanding that people deeply don't believe and are likely to ignore your communications, how should you communicate about the ocean and ocean science? Well, there's a sort of short-term solution that can move the needle a little bit. And that's really about sort of transforming the image of ocean science, but triggering the subconscious. And this is really sort of marketing, sort of an advertising sort of tools that do that. So does science need to look like ocean science, or can you disguise it as something a bit more familiar? So, for example, there's a great project at Woods Hole studying an iceberg, a massive iceberg breaking off and as it disappears, and what happens to the environment and everything about that iceberg. No one's ever really studied that. But the usual communications around this, people don't tend to get engaged. So why not make it look like a blockbuster with stars? And suddenly you sort of, oh, that's clearly interesting. I should be interested in that. And it gets you that initial hook. Then Mesabot that we talked about. This was sort of a typical image of this unbelievable robot. It's kind of like this unbelievable stealth robot that goes down and observes life without life noticing it's there. The trouble is, you look at this image and there's some subconscious things going on. One of the big things is kind of that yellow color. Now, obviously, it's the favorite color in ocean science, but it triggers some sort of bad things inside. The reason why is yellow is people's least favorite color. Well, it's one of the least favorite, but it means discount to everyone. So you're looking at it and it's discount science, can't be very valuable. So just a quick little makeover, and we said, right, let's turn it gold. Okay, that's valuable, and suddenly valuable science. And it's that simple, just in terms of just how communicating these projects can be. Costs virtually nothing to do. It was a little bit of spray paint and some stickers to put on the name, etc. And suddenly, this is going to be I think the opening scene of Blue Planet 3, the deep. Just having this robot, and it's the difference between a wasted opportunity and a huge opportunity of engaging people. Here's another one of my favorite robots. This is the world's first underwater rescue robot for robots. And it's designed to sort of de-risk sort of going under the ice with these hugely expensive robots. This one goes in and gets them out of trouble. But again, this isn't that interesting. You look at it and you go, would I be engaged in the science? So we thought, let's put it to a designer, and we packaged this up and gave it a concept. So it's sort of round biomimicry. It's basically, we turned it into a leatherback turtle. Really muscular vehicle that then can go in, and you've got storytelling now, and suddenly people engaged, and subconsciously you just love nature and design that's nature focused. So it again triggers that subconscious. So these are all sort of techniques that we're doing, and that's what we're doing at sort of Room 71, just working with scientists to look to see how we can incorporate design into some of the vehicles. We're working on what potentially will be kind of the most pioneering vehicle in a generation at Woods Hole. It's kind of a replacement for the Jason robot. But I did actually a Google search on the design, a sort of a Google image search, as it was currently sort of being developed. And it looked like it came up with, is this an industrial air conditioning unit? No, it's a pioneering underwater vehicle for deep sea exploration. Let's make it look that way. So that's what we're doing, and these are fun projects to work on. But then there's the tricky one. So this is the other part, and this is reimagining communication about the ocean. So flip beliefs about the ocean. And it is phenomenally difficult. This is going to be a long-term sort of mission. And the first thing that we need to do is to point out the ocean is not what you imagine, and have some fun doing it. So we've been sort of developing this sort of a little test. It's like almost a sort of a COVID test for ocean blindness, to prove that you don't know the ocean as well as you can. And we've come up with sort of 10 very, very basic questions about the ocean, which at least 90% of people get 100% wrong. So it's things like, what's the most common animal? Yes, okay, we've got some experts in the room here. That's the 10%. I've had to throw in some deeper one. Excellent. What is the oldest animal then? Oh, we got a sponge here. Yes, the glass sponge, 16,000 years old. And it's, if you want to sort of have the epitome of extraordinary creatures, this is it. It feeds off it's a filter feeder, and it's filtering water with that 10 billion viruses in it, essentially, for 16,000 years. So it has pretty much the best immune system on the planet. And yet people are unaware, really, of its existence in sort of the areas where we're doing the deep sea mining. These are the kind of extraordinary animals that are down there in this extraordinary alien environment. And they've got so many potential benefits for humanity. So we're sort of doing this point, first of all, to sort of say, right, the ocean isn't what you imagine, and you don't know that much about it generally. And then, once we've basically taken the floor away from people and made people realize they're not looking at the ocean in the right way, we then do an ocean reintroduction. And what we've been doing is pulling all the sort of knowledge from the various scientists at Woods Hole, but also the communities that they work with, and pulling that together to do an ocean reintroduction that's very different from the usual ocean reintroduction. And I think going back to this picture, I actually went out to the Marquesas in Polynesia to really understand kind of cultural understanding. And in the Polynesian culture, sort of ancient Polynesian culture, they believe there's two oceans. You know, there's two very separate oceans out there. There's the ocean we're familiar with, and then there's the ocean beyond the horizon, which is all important, that we are actually related to. And it's that sort of, there's these two very different parts to it. And that, when you start speaking to the sciences, you realize it's actually true. Now, the Polynesians couldn't understand kind of what I now understand from the science, but there's this shallow ocean. It's the blue ocean. It's the ocean like our world. It's known as sort of the mixed layer. And that is physically separated from another area that looks like this. And it is a truly alien world that is 20 times bigger than the ocean that we know. And pretty much everything that goes on in this world is almost unimaginable. One of the best ways of describing it is that sort of our world is sort of almost two-dimensional in terms of the environments that we live in. You know, everything gravitates to surfaces, and often it does in that shallow area. But in the deep, it is three-dimensional. And it's something that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So you see an image of the deep sea, and you see not much life, but you're not factoring in the fact that it is spread over in three dimensions. So what appears to be sparse life is highly abundant. And you know, imagery never communicates that when you get into the deep. So you need to find ways of overcoming that sort of visual bias of looking at it to understand it's an extraordinary environment. And when you start delving into this sort of alien environment, you realize how different it is. I actually like giving them two different words, so ocean and then oceanus, this other world that is really, this was the original sort of word for ocean, and it means kind of the water beyond our known world. And so there's this oceanus that's out there that we almost have an inability to wrap our heads around or think about. And an example of that is, hopefully, is this creature. You know, this is a sea serpent, and it lives in Oceanus, and it's 11 meters long. Yeah, it normally sort of hangs vertically in the water column, and it's so obviously 50% bigger than a giraffe. Imagine if no one realized giraffes existed. So this is an oarfish, and you know, we should not be unfamiliar with the megafauna in this Oceanus. And yet we are unfamiliar with most life here. So that great layer of life has got phenomenal animals in it. You know, Salps is another great example. It's like a carbonating machine that can clone itself and basically is just sucking up the equivalent of, I think, taking 100 million cars off the road a year. And people haven't heard that it exists. So this is kind of the communication that we need to be doing. And what I love about these kind of two different oceans is they are physically separated. They're physically separated by the thermocline. But when they do mix, and sometimes you get these upwellings, and it sort of pushes through and creates this mixing effect, there's an explosion of life. And really that's when you start to understand the importance and just the unbelievable nature of this other ocean. This is just, you know, explosion of anchovies, that happens when you get kind of that upwelling. You can get up to 1,000 times the biomass, sort of typical biomass, in these upwelling situations where these two bodies of water mix. And so we've got these two layers, and we need to be thinking about the ocean in these two layers, and then explain sort of Oceanus. And that's when we can start sort of really introducing people to the ocean and thinking of it as a whole, not just the skin of the ocean, but the whole ocean. And so that's sort of the ocean is black, not blue, and it's far cooler. We actually do a swim at Woods Hole, which I've started. It's in February. It's when the ocean is typical ocean temperature, which, can anyone guess, 38 degrees. It's not pleasant. And we do it at night, at midnight, just so we can really understand what the ocean really feels like. It's not that popular. Then the second one is, the ocean is vastly bigger and heavier. I like to put a sort of a 64-pound jacket on people. That's the weight of 1 cubic foot of water. And you'd have 12,000 of those on average ocean depth. And tell people there's about 100 times more life in the ocean than people imagine. We think of seafood and the food that the life that entertains us. We never think of the vast amount of life that's out there that we just don't comprehend. And then we teach people, and this was one of those sort of epiphanies for me, speaking to a scientist at Woods Hole, where he just sort of dropped into the conversation. Oh yeah, life in the ocean is more extraordinary than terrestrial life. Okay, and it was just that moment where you realize this is an alien environment, it is really hostile, you have to be extraordinary to survive. And so we look down on this sort of ocean life when we should be looking up to this ocean life. And we should be thinking of it as alien as it actually is, because it's got huge potential benefit for humanity. And that's so much that we can learn from it. And then finally, the ocean is the source of unimaginable discoveries. It's not just the life, it's the fact that you've got underwater waterfalls 1,000 times bigger than Niagara Falls. You've got areas where virtually no sediment ever builds up. It takes almost 1 million years for a small amount to build up because you've got these superhighways, and just there's so much that we can learn from the ocean if we really go exploring. And so we're calling kind of this re-education, this reframing of the ocean, sort of the Oceanus Project. And now we're getting to the stage where we've got our sort of narrative together, and it's about kind of execution time. And to execute this, really it's about partnerships. Now, this is sort of our first partnership, Ponant, which is kind of the world's leading luxury expedition company. And I was fortunate enough to go onto this ship. This was a sort of image I took in, I think, January this year. And this is, for me, the best ship in the world. It's an icebreaker, but luxury French-style, 5-star icebreaker with Michelin star chef on board. But this, 250 guests, and they've got actually 18 ships in the fleet. So can we get people who get on board to have one view of the ocean and then get off with a completely transformed view of the ocean, which they then share? And so we're introducing this ocean reintroduction as part of their guest experience. And there are so many businesses and organizations out there that can benefit from this storytelling and being able to sort of leverage this for their own benefit, but allows us to really hit key audiences. These are some of the most influential people on the planet that go onto these ships. So it was a logical place to start. But we want to be talking to documentary makers. We want to be talking to exhibition companies, etc., to develop kind of storytelling around this theme. And so really that's it. The person who is sitting in the lucky chair, I am expecting something fairly profound, because that last person who sat in the chair changed my life and brought me back here to do another big idea presentation. But anybody else can please just contact me via our website and hopefully find out more. Thank you.
thank you. I guess we join you for this Q&A. Where would you like?
I'm gonna have to go here. I need to put rest. Okay, amazing. Big ideas from you two. Really, really inspiring. I guess just to kick this off, and then we'll open this up to the crowd. I think starting with Gakani, if you could go back to that, you were 10. How old were you in that photo, the spiroscope? 10. 10. Just like, what sort of advice might you offer that? And that'll lead into the next. Okay. What sort of advice? Perhaps don't worry too much. I think a lot of kids, right, growing up, they're being pushed to make decisions early on about what they want to do and how to do it. And, I look at my trajectory, starting in aerospace and then now doing ocean stuff and going on expeditions and things like that. Like, these are things you would never be able to predict, but really embrace that version of you when you were young and what is exciting and what is motivating and drives you, and never forget that, because you may come back to it in some other form or fashion later. A really weird example of this is, as you mentioned, and I don't talk about it very much, but it does come up quite a bit, is I used to be a figure skater, an ice dancer, and my partner was my brother, which is interesting in itself. And I remember we were representing Seattle Skating Club, so we were heavily involved in competitions all over the world, but we were also involved in kind of the theater community, and that they were setting up fake ice rinks in different theaters in the area. And I remembered I really wanted this opportunity to perform at the most amazing performing arts hall there someday. And it's the Benaroya Hall. If any of you have been to Seattle, you know what I'm talking about. And so that never materialized. But just before COVID, I started doing National Geographic Live talks, and I finally got invited to Benaroya Hall. And it was the weirdest kind of out-of-body experience, because it was a dream, but it was slightly displaced. And you just never know what will happen. And so I think, these little moments in time where you're like, oh, this is something I really would love to do. Don't be afraid to dream big, because, maybe it'll happen, but just in a slightly different way.
That's beautiful. And now to think, many young people look to you as an inspiration. You're running the Bio-Inspiration Lab in Mabari. How do you see, and you probably get many times of people you saying, I want to do what you're doing. And a lot of times I think people, there's one thing of just having folks on the sidelines watching what you do, but it's another thing what you're doing with Fathomverse, of trying to bring people along. Maybe just expand a little more on your vision of how the world comes with you on this journey you're painting, and how to bring young scientists on this as well.
I think that's a great point. I think, at least myself, I feel very privileged to be able to do the things that I'm able to do. The things that I've seen, we were at Sylvia's event last night, to see her and all of her impact, that's something I absolutely look up to. And, I recognize that not everyone has this kind of access. Not everyone can be inspired by Earthlings, not aliens, right, that are in our ocean. We're just ignorant of them. And so for me, with all of that privilege, I think it's important for it to be shared, but to be shared in a really meaningful way, not just kind of the usual, I guess, social media approach of, the bullhorn that you're just yelling out, this is this type of stuff I'm doing, it's amazing, blah, blah, blah. But actually trying to provide opportunities for people to come along with you, or to interact, or to participate. And I think, Fathomverse is an example of that. If you go to Fathomverse and you download the app, we have a Discord server community there. 1,500 to 1,600 people are on there pretty regularly. And I just love that we can have these really wholesome conversations about animals that are really, really cool. I mean, Pokemon, right, is an example. Remember Pokemon Go? Anyone here? Right? Right? This app that would mobilize, millions of people around the world to like actually wander outside of their houses and like explore their neighborhoods. They're inspired to do this by fake animals. Like, could we do something inspired by real ocean life? And so I'm trying to think about how do we bring along everyone on this mission of exploration.
That's beautiful, and we obviously have a few more new ones signed up since
So
earlier.
great.
But Richard, first off, if you want to sign up for the cold plunge, we're taking. We'll have a checklist outside or if you want to put on that heavy vest, that's also. I just want to kind of pose to you because you reached millions of people with Chasing Coral, and I understand coral. I mean, I came from coral as well, and I love it. And it was a bit like trying to get people to fall in love with a pet rock, which is hard. And I also come from a microbiological background where I've been in the room where like microbiologists are trying so hard to be like, it's the coolest dinoflagellate, and everyone's like. But tell me a little bit about this journey from corals and now segueing into Room 71, and just like that trajectory. I'd just love to hear a little bit more.
Well, I think it's been such a great, interesting learning experience sort of going on this journey, and it was this talk a few years ago that took me on this different path. I got so absorbed in coral reefs, but then almost a little bit disillusioned by, we raised the awareness, we raised the funds, and then almost the execution of those funds is where things start to fall down. A lot of organizations aren't basing it on science. It's about emotion. I really want to restore this reef, so I will restore this reef. This reef cannot be restored. It's in the wrong location. We need to be smarter about that. And that's where I kind of started moving towards science. And then there was sort of this bigger opportunity of sort of the broader oceans. But it was that idea that you need to understand the oceans to be able to tackle things like coral reefs in the shallows. You need to understand all of the ocean. You need to understand the currents. You get underwater and it's very easy to think you're an expert. And you look at a coral reef and you're looking in that direction and this direction, oh, that's the place to restore. It's not. You cannot guess which is the right place to restore. You need the oceanographic data that tells you this bit is going to reseed and it's got potential to survive. That hasn't. They're 30 meters apart. They look identical. You need science. And that's where I feel that the learning curve I've gone on is now I've got this new appreciation of science as a whole, ocean science as a whole, that needs to be sucked into kind of the conservation community because it's not there yet.
That's great. And now I want to kind of shift to I was about to say the elephant in the room, but it's the wrong room to be saying such a thing because it is Ocean Week. But so we're going to be talking about this siphonophore in the room or the blue whale in the room. What do you want to call it?
Let's call it siphonophores.
Okay, let's call it, yeah.
They're bigger than blue whales if they were considered an individual.
I knew you'd catch that, yeah. So that's why I brought that one into here. So let's talk about the siphonophore in the room here, which is AI. I mean, it's just like you open up the newspaper, AI is, so I just want to think about, I'll go to each one of you. How do you see AI for ocean communication? Just paint some kind of vision for the future in your respective areas. So.
Well, I actually think it's really, really useful in ocean communication because generally photography does mislead. So especially in deep ocean, it's very easy to get the wrong impression from this. And these environments are almost unimaginable because it is about the unseen elements. So what AI is great at doing is visualizing the unimaginable. And so you can really start playing with visuals so it communicates the reality of the ocean rather than this picture taken through photography that essentially captures our world really well, but not kind of the deep. So if we work with companies that really specialize in AI visuals, I think you can have some really interesting ways of engaging new audiences with something they've never seen before. Get that feeling of the deep ocean to then get them hooked in the first place.
My impression?
Yeah, just let's.
Yeah, it might be very different than yours, because and perhaps it's because of, I mean, imaging. That's basically my bread and butter. So I think a lot about how do I capture the ocean and ocean life in ways that are representative of it to its fullest extent. And the incorporation of AI to perhaps, better, I think it's, I think that's, I mean, it's a worthy approach. It's worth trying. I do think, though, that, sometimes just sharing what the ocean looks like in real life, getting people access to that, to see it and experience it is powerful in itself. And I mean, another thing too, right, with AI, and obviously we do a lot of work in AI, so there's a lot of discussion that's going on too around, the impacts of AI and how it's impacting, our natural environment and et cetera, especially generative AI and like creating imagery or video using those sorts of tools. And so, decision making around whether we should be using them for applications like this is a really important discussion to be had. But I want to also just inject, and this is partly because of our experience with the use of AI, is that the AI isn't going to save the ocean. People are going to save the ocean. And what the AI allows us to do in a lot of examples or instances is kind of act as a force multiplier, but on its own, it's not. It needs us to function properly and appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really interesting, and it's a tool. And I think one of the key themes that's kind of ran through both of your talks is how little we know about the ocean at this moment in time in 2025. And I mean, just to take us to a moment to be like, we've not, when the founding of this club, like, people were probably taking oxygen tanks from, and trying to breathe underwater. So it's not been that long that humans have been going in these amazing submarines, and to be able to, and there's, like you mentioned, it's hard to get there to the bottom. So there is so much to do. So it'll be kind of interesting to see these answers in the next 20 years about where AI or where our knowledge is going and the direction, because that's why I think this moment is so important right now, because it could go in many directions, and there's still a lot of those 18,000-year-old glass sponges down there that have been...
So cool.
Yeah. And like, honestly, when you see them, they kind of look like weeds. Like, I remember the first time well, not weeds, but they're still beautiful. I saw you look at me like,
What are you talking about?
Not weeds, but like, you're in the bottom of Earth, you're not with the right lighting, you're just like, oh, that little thing. And I'm like, oh my God, that thing is 18,000 years, 16, 18,000 years. That's like amazing to think of longevity and the alienness and the space and just everything is so different. So it's so important that we approach this in a very precious, delicate way for other generations will have the possibility of enjoying and continuing this journey of discovery. But at this point, I'd love to open it up to you all, and I could see that you've got lots of questions, some that have already on like the third stage of Kakani's game. So I'll leave it. Who will be the mic?
Hey, thank you. It was a super inspirational pair of talks. It was wonderful. My name's Stephen Archella, and we've met in the past. And Richard, I wanted to see if you're still involved with the 50 Reefs initiative, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, we're still involved in the sort of 50 Reefs. 50 Reefs, just for everyone's sort of benefit, it really came out of sort of chasing coral. Realised during the filming that wasn't a sort of global strategy for saving coral reefs. So I came up with this idea of, well, actually there's not much money. So we should just say, we can only save 50. Which 50 should it be? So we posed that question to the scientists. It was hugely controversial at the time because everyone said, we've got to save them all. There's no money. So we need to prioritize. We need to be smart about kind of the targeting of action. And it did unlock, I think Michael Bloomberg, he spent, I think, $96 million on bolstering the 50 reef sites that we identify. It was always designed to be science that was meant to evolve, and there was meant to be funding for the next phase, and the next phase, and the next phase. It was about targeting and improving targeting over time, but we didn't get that kind of funding for that next phase. So it was a big step in the right direction, but we're not using the best possible science to sort of really target our action. So the great thing is we have been able to focus on sites. For example, in the Egypt climate COP, we went there, we took Ellie Goulding to go see one of the 50 reef sites, which is where the COP was being held, and we took her underwater, and it led to kind of the Egyptian government announcing kind of they were going to protect the northern Red Sea, so the Great Fringing Reef, we called it, which was one of those 50 reef sites. So hugely valuable in terms of PR to get kind of protection and to get funding. But I'd love to see it go so much further.
Thanks. Yeah, a wonderful, great pair of talks. And I'm really struck by how you guys are seeing the same problem, but in my opinion, approaching it from a very different perspective. And one, it sounds like a top-down approach to get funding, and the other one sounds like a bottom-up, like increasing accessibility. So it seems like one is kind of targeting a little bit more the elite and the influencers and those who can, really increase funding to protect the oceans, and the other one is kind of opening it up to the masses, to the common person, to get inspired. And I'm curious about you guys' perception of, is one more, you think, effective to increasing funding for ocean exploration, targeting those with money, or that increasing the bottom-up approach? And how could they interplay to really push us forward?
Fascinating question. It's funny, and maybe I'm going to go back to space. Partly because, originally, I think there was a movie that came out recently. They were talking about the marketing of the space program, the human space program, and how it was really unpopular at the time. And so then they hired, and I think there's some truth to it. They hired a marketing firm based in New York and basically helped them with their public messaging, because they recognized if the public isn't behind their mission, they have no hope of getting the right kinds of senators or elected officials to sign off on funding. And so that's, I guess, an example of where kind of that public focus perhaps has worked really well for the space community, and to achieve the levels of funding that we have seen historically with NASA. And maybe that's the bet, right, that we're trying to make here, is if we can reach more people. And I want to say I'm not the only one who's doing this. Aquariums, right? They focus on public engagement. They focus on changing minds about the ocean. I would argue they're some of the most effective messengers when it comes to issues within the ocean and how can people care and how can they change behavior. And so it's interesting that they're perhaps not targeting the funding groups directly, but that it's like a trickle up effect which I think is pretty fun. But I'm not saying that one solution might be better than another. I think they both play important roles. I mean, the fact that Fathomverse, yes, we're focused on public engagement, but we are funded through NSF and Schmidt Ocean or Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, right, to do this kind of work. I feel like by creating a project like Fathomverse that has a lot of exposure or potentially exposed to individuals or groups outside of my usual like ocean technology funding streams, right, that it also can open up a lot of opportunities as well. So, you know, I think a combined approach is going to be really powerful or helpful with this project. But
yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It's about them working together. There's almost no point in getting people to have this epiphany that the ocean isn't what they imagined and it's more important, it's got more potential, if then they can't get involved. And there's nothing there, and so suddenly you're starting to lose that kind of that view. So we need to kind of get that engagement, and then they're looking at these animals in a completely different way. They're not looking at a glass sponge and seeing it through normal eyes. They're seeing it through the new eyes, and it creates this sort of excitement. And that's really sort of what we're trying to do is be disruptive in getting that initial interest to then suck into sort of supporting ocean science.
And you said something really interesting there about action, right? Because I think we could go on and on with, you know, documentaries or other things and, you know, revealing to everyone what the ocean is like. But once we've informed people, then what? Like, what is the action? What are we asking people to do? What are, like, meaningful activities that the public can take that could perhaps change or move the needle on how we approach the ocean? And so I think that's been a largely a missing piece. And that's something that we really lean heavily in for Fathomverse, where just playing a game, yes, it seems weird. You're just spending your time, as you know, on your device. Of course, adults love that. But it's an action. It's an action that you can take to grow our knowledge, inform what we're looking at, and then, you know, then kickstart a whole bunch of opportunities for exploration and discovery. And so I think that action piece, we have to do a much better job of communicating that when we do talk to all of these groups or individuals.
We can do one or two more.
Thank you both for your talk. With UN, the Ocean Conference coming up, and you talked about the fractionalization on an organization level, how are policymakers thinking about this, and what are the biggest challenges to prioritizing oceans as part of their agenda?
I started the last one. It's your turn.
Yeah, I've been to sort of the two previous UN Ocean conferences, and I still can't believe there have only ever been two. And you know, this is the third one. You go in and you see that opening speech, and it tends to be very uninspiring and often not factually correct. Because people don't believe that the ocean is that important. It's not that important to get facts correct. It's not that important to focus on the issues that really matter, or even know which ones are the top priorities we should be focused on. So I think there's some fundamental belief changes that we need to happen at that policymaker level to really address things properly. But these are great opportunities still to make progress. And I think we need to sort of do everything to support these, you know, so we've got a delegation going from Woods Hole out to there. So we've got kind of an ocean pavilion with OceanX. And I think it's really critically important to make these opportunities when people do get together to make progress. But I think we've got some fundamental kind of education that we need to do, and re-education to make sort of significant progress.
How much time do I have for this?
40 seconds.
I know, probably not enough. I mean, I think that's really kind of the crux of the problem, right? How do we get information to decision makers around, you know, how the ocean functions, or how it might be used or could be used sustainably? In my stance, and perhaps that's because, you know, I'm a scientist at a research institution, is I want to give them the data. I want them to have evidence so that they can make informed decisions. And so that is something that I at least passionately feel really strongly about. And that's why things like FathomNet or Fathomverse now exists. So I can talk about that other stuff later.
Yeah.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Fania Rose, and your presentations were and are inspiring. There's just one word that I thought you may be missing, and one is regulation. And if you've thought of it, how are you going to administer it?
Interesting. You mean regulation behind...
The people working in the ocean. And then an awful scenario, if they're all using these drone-type things, if something goes wrong, is there any regulation that they have to take it out of the ocean? Otherwise, there are no people on board. They'll just drop it, and the floor of the ocean will become a graveyard for devices.
That's an interesting question, and I think the point you're trying to make is like, even if we were able to someday observe all of the ocean, what might that take, and what might be our impact as we do that? And it's a really good question. I think that's where the bit about autonomy is really important, right? The fact that we just don't have a lot of resources available to us, and instead of polluting our stars like we're seeing now with all of these different satellites that are being launched, blocking clear night skies, like we can make decisions that minimize those impacts. One example is a group, they were funded by the National Science Foundation as part of the program that we were involved in. Their group name is called Nereid Biomaterials. They're based out of UC Santa Barbara, and they focus on how do we create materials, particularly plastic materials that can break down really easily if we are deploying a lot of instrumentation in order to make these kinds of observations. And they've impregnated their materials with microbes that will actually break down those plastics so that they can be used in that way. So it's a great example of trying to minimize our impact while we're doing those observations. But I don't know if I totally answered your question, but that's just an example of one of the ways we can do that.
Yeah, I would just say that I think there has to be a desire for regulation before there could be regulation, and there's the oceans are crossing all bounds. So it's like you could make a regulation in one place and not another, and and easily we see things in coral reefs, for instance. You could come in and take all the fish out in one night, so you could have all these regulations, but you don't have enforcement. So it's a very complicated thing, and you need the hearts and the intentions right now in the right place. And I think it's great that you're having this ocean meeting again, but it'd be even better if behind that ocean meeting comes real commitments and real fundings. So there's more Kakanis and more Richard doing more of this and reaching more hearts and minds, because your number up there of $1 million is extraordinary. And you mentioned NASA funding, which was government backed, and I don't know, today's budget would probably be in the trillions. So it really takes that kind of commitment to drive this, and in today's ecosystem, that's even more important. So the best hope now is to just get behind it, and especially get behind it financially, and these big ideas could all come to fruition. But thank you both for leaving us inspired.
Thank you.
Thank you, the Explorers Club.
Many of you that have been, if I could get you to stay in your seats for just a second. We're going to wrap this up quickly. Many of you have been to some of these events and you're aware of a little ceremony we have afterwards. And not unlike a lot of other organizations, we have Explorers Club Challenge coins. For Oceans Week every year, we have, through Reach the World and classrooms, they have a contest for artwork, and the winner of that artwork goes on the challenge coin. So we wanted to present you all. It's a tangible sign of appreciation for a job well done, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, there is a certain procedure you have to go through when you're familiar with it. Yeah. So thank you. Good job. Connie?
It's like a secret handshake.
Yes. Yeah. Good job.
Good. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much. And if you can show them, salmon, one of the ambassador species, was the winner, and she was here today and gave the challenge coins out to the earlier.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. There's a post-reception with some drinks and some food across the hall.